Hey, welcome to another episode of Being Spiritual at RU with Scott and Matt. I'm Matt and Scott.
Hello.
Couple things before we dive into today's topic. If you could like, subscribe, share, that'd be great. Comment even to ask questions or maybe give ideas for topics in the future. Over the next few weeks after this week, we'll have a few folks on, other chaplains on campus to share stories. We're kind of leading to a storytelling night with our dean, Katrina, on February 19th. So if you're at Rutgers on campus, if you're able to join us, I believe it's 7 p.m. and the location is it the College Ave?
The graduate student lounge, which is
Okay,
behind Panera on College Ave.
okay, there you go. Graduate Student Lounge, 7 p.m. There'll be free food.
Mhm.
Come get dinner and tell stories. We'd love to
Yeah,
have you.
yeah, absolutely. And if you don't follow us yet on social media, both our groups have, I guess, Instagram. We should probably put some links or things in our bio or something so people
Yeah,
can.
that's a good idea. For
Um,
next time,
yeah, just make sure that it's there. And if you
we'll
want to see what else we're doing, we have
yeah,
programs and stuff. Then just check us out.
love
And
to have it.
yeah,
I'll put it in the notes if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook. Um, Anyhow, today we wanted to dive into this, what's going on in our like a cultural moment. We want to address it, and there's been a lot of cultural moments. I'm getting kind of cultural moment overload again. Uh, Seems like Donald brings that, but he really is just a the lightning rod for a vast portion of our culture, of our American culture. So
right.
we can't completely just blame him. He
Oh
is a
no.
representative,
Yeah.
of a lot of people. And so the big topic right now that we want to address is the undocumented, the immigrants, and the refugees. I think the first thing I always want to address in this is right now, Trump and his minions are definitely conflating these three and lumping them together
Mhm.
and basically calling them all criminals, that most of our crime in America is committed by these folks, which is entirely false. In fact, I did some research on this week, in fact, and actually there's a less percent chance that a crime will be committed by an undocumented immigrant or refugee than a natural born American citizen. So
Yep.
you're more likely to get murdered or stabbed or your car stolen by a natural born American than an undocumented immigrant and refugee, which makes a lot of sense because a lot of these folks are coming here desperate. Either they're poor, impoverished, they're migrants, or they're actually refugees who are fearing for their lives.
Mhm.
And so they're going to keep a lower profile
Mhm.
and try to stay out of trouble. In fact, most of the crime that these folks commit are little misdemeanors, because they're not used to our traffic laws and those sorts of things.
Right.
So I think, yeah, I want to clear that up, that they're not criminals by and large. Certainly, they're in any large people group, there's going to be criminals. So you
Right.
can,
And I think a lot of
yeah,
it is the fear tactic to make your average sort of American, typically white American, afraid of brown people. Let's be
yeah,
afraid of anybody who looks different than I am. And especially if they speak Spanish or have any other language other than English is not their first language, then we should be suspicious of them and fear them. And that is the tactic that's been going. And honestly, I was reading something the other day at the victory speech, inauguration speech, whatever. Trump was saying that crime is up in all these cities and he's going to fix that. Crime's actually down. And he doesn't want anybody to pay attention to the facts, but he wants you to think that cities mean family members of mine will say, "Oh, you live by New York. Be careful when you get into New York. You're going to get mugged." And people in New York are saying, this is not. And of course, you get high profile things when somebody gets pushed in front of a train or something happens like that. But that really is rare. It's a rare incident, and people are who want to make you afraid will bring up those things and just stoke the fires of fear. But that's an old tactic. I mean, whether it was, you know, profiling, stereotyping Jews in Nazi Germany, when they would talk about, Jews stealing money and they're, greedy, blah, blah, blah. You always paint the target audience with this stereotype. And yeah, that's what's been going on at least since 2015, probably. But definitely before that, be afraid. Or I remember back when Reagan was president, he talked about welfare queens, people, women who were driving Cadillacs and getting paid welfare. And this is what and it was just this stereotype that had no basis in reality. But people believed it, readily believed it, because a lot of Americans are quite racist at their heart.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. It is the target. Brown people, um, especially those that you could be a natural born American citizen and be brown and have an accent because you're growing up in maybe you're a second generation, your parents immigrated here, right?
But
And
of course,
they're legal and you're legal, and
but
you're arrested. And that's happening,
and
actually.
their desire, of course, is to get rid of birthright citizenship, which is constitutional, and they cannot just get rid of it. But that idea that even if you're born here, if we don't like you and your family, we will deport you.
Yeah.
So,
And I want to, one of the things that Fox News and some of the more conservative news channels are saying is like all the people right now being arrested and deported are just criminals. That's false as well. I have firsthand knowledge. I've been speaking up online about this, and I've had stories. And maybe if you're watching, you have a story. I'd love to hear it. We'd love to hear it of family members who are being arrested that are law-abiding citizens. Some of them are even here legally. I know for a fact. Talking with a local pastor who does a lot of work with immigration, that one of their refugee families, a couple of the refugee families, in fact, were confronted by ICE to be deported, who came here perfectly legally, went through the process the right way. We're not criminals, not committing a crime. I know of a grandmother, similar, just your average normal grandmother who's been here since she was, a teenager, arrested and deported, who was known by ICE, who was going through the actual real process and doing the right things, because Trump has put this quota on ICE to arrest people and deport them, and so they want to keep their jobs. They're human; they want to keep their jobs, and so they're just
well, and some of them
taking
are
the
actually hateful, racist people as
yeah,
well.
well, that too.
Yeah,
But I'm trying to give them a little bit of credit.
sure, sure.
It's probably a tough situation to be in. Um,
But I mean, if they're going into schools, which they are, going into
yeah,
arrest children, and they're going to workplaces to arrest people at work, that tells you these aren't criminals on the street they're arresting. These are people who are working. These are children in school that they
exactly.
are arresting and deporting. So that tells you right there, their agenda does not recognize whether someone is here legally. They just want to get rid of brown people, period.
Yeah. Well, and they set up, so they're taking low hanging fruit to meet these quotas.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're not taking criminals. Uh, I mean, of course, they're taking some criminals, but by and large, they're not. And then they just opened this Gitmo base,
Mm-hmm.
to house 30,000 deportees.
Mm-hmm.
Which is definitely a concentration camp. I
I was
mean,
going
let's
to
just
say,
call it what it is.
let's round people up into camps. What does that sound like?
Yeah. It's a disaster, and they're not going to. I mean, Trump has, even in his memo, his executive order, said it's just for the worst of the worst, criminals, and it's not true. Like, there's not 30,000 criminal immigrants in this country.
Right.
It's just not true.
Right.
So it's going to be grandmas and kids. That's what's going to happen.
Oh, yeah. Remember the
Um,
last time there were children in cages? I mean,
yeah,
treating children like criminals and, treating them as if they have no human dignity. And, when it's only been a week and a half that the Episcopal bishop in Washington, D.C. asked the president to have some mercy. And of course, she's been vilified, called an atheist, called a God hater. I mean, all these things just for saying to the president, please be merciful. One of the things we promise, at least in the Episcopal Church, for when we do our baptismal vows, we promise to respect the dignity of every human being. And this is not respecting the dignity of every human being. This is the opposite. This is vilifying and treating them like less than human. And again, painting them with a broad brush. It's criminal on their end, not the immigrants' end. So,
Yeah, I mean, you hit on it. I want the next part of this conversation. You kind of hit on it with your baptismal vows, and the bishop was. It's actually very biblical to, as the bishop preached, and she preached a great sermon, and it was a very biblical sermon. It was not political. I mean, it was political in the sense that Jesus is political. Everything he did is political, and
absolutely.
but it wasn't partisan politics. She wasn't trying to be a Democrat and push that agenda. She was
Right.
calling us, to the nation, Trump, to have mercy, to live out the gospel of grace and peace. And so it is a very biblical thing. In fact, in the lectionary readings last week and this Sunday, Jesus has a lot to say about this in Luke chapter 4, where he came for the oppressed, the captives. And then this week, he tells two examples of what that looks like. And he uses an example of Naaman, the foreigner, that he came for the foreigner.
Mm-hmm.
And, those political and religious leaders at the time tried to stone Jesus for that. So Jesus came for the oppressed and the foreigner, and he made that explicit in kind of his inaugural address, his coming out party, and people are upset, right? So there's nothing new under the sun. This is very similar, and Jesus was for those folks. Jesus is for the undocumented, for the immigrant, for the refugee, and he calls us Christians to open our homes, to open our sanctuaries to these folks. And so our posture as Christians should not be to round these folks up, to get them out, to kick them out of the country. That is not biblical. That's
Right.
antichrist. I mean, I'll
That's
say it that bluntly.
that's the
Yeah.
job of the Roman authorities in Jesus' day. That's
Yes.
the job of the secular authorities. But don't conflate Jesus with that, because that was nothing he ever advocated. He was always against the Roman Empire, against those leaders. And yeah, it's just so misguided to tell people, Jesus would be part of ICE or whatever. People like to think of Jesus as this great Trump loving, but again, it's their image of Jesus and their convenient Jesus, not the Jesus who says things like "be merciful." They don't like that Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
No, they don't. JD Vance just came out today, or yes, it probably was yesterday, interview where he said that biblically we're called to take care of our families first, and then our neighbor, and then our country, and then the world. And he said the leftists are the opposite. And I was just like, has he read Jesus? I mean, Jesus
Right.
literally says for us to leave our families, to go love our neighbors, right? To go love the world.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and on examples of Jesus. He calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves. Or this is one that conservatives will never, want to live with, even if they're right, that all of these undocumented immigrants and refugees are all criminals. They're all evil. Jesus tells us to love them 70 times ourselves, right? 70 times 7. Love them infinity beyond ourselves. So we're called to love the enemy, the criminal, even more than we love ourselves. So
Absolutely. Yep.
it's just so backwards,
Yeah,
what
and
they're saying.
when Jesus talked about loving your neighbor, somebody asked one of those questions. Well, who is my neighbor? Because there was actually debate going on in the religious community of the day that, neighbor only means people like me, people who look, who are in my religious, group, whatever. People really tried to explain away, because that's a commandment that goes back to the earliest days of Judaism, is loving your neighbor as yourself. And that's why Jesus told us the parable of the Good Samaritan, to say, who was the neighbor to this man? And it was the
Yeah.
Samaritan, who was, in theory, his enemy.
Mm-hmm.
They really had nothing to do with each other. But the only one who came to this murder, this mugging victim's aid, this guy's mugged, nobody helped him except somebody who, in theory, was his enemy. That was his neighbor right then, the one who actually helped him. So that's
Yeah.
what Jesus taught. We're not making this up.
No,
You know?
no. It's yeah, it is the way of Jesus. And if you think that's leftist, then I guess you're calling Jesus a leftist.
Well, yeah,
It's just
I'm happy to be lumped in, with Jesus,
yeah.
leftist. So, but yeah, it's when you speak truth to power, as the expression goes, people get really angry and upset and really lash out. And again, Bishop Budde and others. It's just, I mean, it's only a week and a half into this administration, and already we're here. And I think I've been reading some people saying that's sort of the strategy, is to overwhelm with all this action so that people who oppose it feel powerless or feel like there's nothing we can do about it. And in the moment, perhaps there is nothing we can do. We can't stop it or change it, but we can resist it, and we can start to build and strategize against it, which is what a lot of churches are doing and other groups. But we're paying attention, and we may not be able to, stop all of this right now. But given time and given organizing and courage, I think you'll start to really see people do the work of Jesus, despite, the threats of arrest
Yeah.
or what people, are afraid of.
Yeah, I think we can close with this last few minutes here. It's just like, what do we do? I think we were talking that before we went live and record this, that it takes a village. We all need to play our part. We all have our expertise. We all have our knowledge and experiences. We all have a voice. I think using our voice is important. We saw even this week, people, voicing their opinion about the federal freeze on funds for Head Start, school lunches, Medicaid, and those sorts of things. And it was lifted because there was a unified voice actually on both sides of the aisle that, like,
Mm-hmm.
whoa, 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 whoa.
Yeah.
And so I think using our voice is important in these conversations. And so it can be overwhelming. Yeah, I think that's a strategy. He wants stuff to get lost in the shuffle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important we do pay attention and we do speak up. We do organize. We do play our part. I think we all have a role to play
Mm-hmm.
in it. And so, yeah, I think to me, that's the call right now, is just to don't sit quietly, to speak up, to do your part, to engage. So
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
any
And
thoughts on that, Scott?
yeah, I think, and also, as you were saying, there are people out there who have been doing the work of justice for decades, and
Mhm.
they already know a lot of this. And like you're saying, we are kind of experts in different areas. So I think we need to learn to rely on each other. And if we've got a
Yeah.
question or a problem, figure out who might know the answer. So networking is very important, getting to
Mhm.
know and seeing, who we might be able to organize around one issue. So maybe like, Medicare, or whatever it might be. There might be allies out there we didn't realize we had to organize around that, and it's that organization that will help us to build a resistance, to say, we are not going to allow these things to be changed basically on a whim. And I think it's really his display of power is what he wants to show. I can do this. I can stop these payments. And whether or not it's legal, and whether or not they would actually be reversed at some point, it's just this power grab, this power move on his part. Because I think it's that ego, it's his ego, it's feeding his ego. And that's exactly what he wants. He just thinks he runs the world now. And it's going to be hard to prove to him that he doesn't. Maybe he never will realize that. But yeah, it's we've got to be watching for allies out there that we may not have even realized were there.
Yeah, I love that. It takes a certain level of humility too, especially in online virtual stuff and even in-person stuff. It takes some humility to defer and to learn.
Mhm.
But I love what you said. It is just it takes everybody, it takes the village, and lean on folks that have been there before. Lean on maybe folks that haven't been there before, but maybe are experiencing real stuff, like their family members are suffering, they're suffering.
Right.
You know,
Mhm.
I know I've had conversations with folks that are in great fear right now,
Yep.
because
Yeah. And
of different statuses of their spouse. Like I just was texting a former youth group member when I was youth pastor whose husband is illegal and undocumented, and and they're just fearing, like what that could mean. So
yep.
a lot of fear.
Absolutely. And I talked to a student who confidentially confided in me that his parents are undocumented.
Mm,
They live here, and he's very afraid. And of course, I'm sure the forces that be would love to get rid of the student as well because they don't believe in birthright citizenship. But the student was born here, and there's just so much fear out there,
yeah,
uh, which is exactly what the strategy has been, is to make people afraid.
yeah. Well, Scott and I are here for you. So if you ever
Absolutely.
want to talk, if you want to process, please reach out. We'd love to chat. I mean, you can connect with us on any feed that you see this. We are watching those.
And we can post our
So
email something too.
yeah, and yeah, be in touch. So
Yep.
thanks for joining us today. We'll be back in next week. I think we got Kaiser on next week,
Yep.
to tell some stories. So excited about that. He's a good
Yep.
storyteller. I think
Absolutely.
everybody will enjoy that.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.